My fiancé got drunk at her sister's wedding and announced, "I'm only marrying him because my ex won't commit." 200 guests heard. I stood up. "Let me fix that for you." Then I called off our wedding into the microphone. When she begged me the next morning, "This went down last weekend and I'm still dealing with the fallout, but figured it was time to share the whole disaster. Fair warning, this is going to be long because there's a lot of background that explains why everything exploded the way it did." My ex-fiancée Rachel and I had been together for 4 years. We got engaged 8 months ago, after what I thought was a solid relationship. I'm 31 and work in commercial real estate. Good money, decent hours, and I've got my life together. Rachel is 28 and works as a marketing coordinator for some tech startup. Makes okay money, but nothing spectacular. The thing about Rachel is, she always had this weird relationship with her past. Specifically with her ex-boyfriend Tyler, who she dated all through college and for 2 years after. They broke up about 6 months before she and I met. According to her, he was immature and couldn't commit to anything serious. Didn't want to move in together, wasn't ready for marriage, all the usual stuff. But here's what bothered me from early on. She brought him up constantly. Tyler did this. Tyler said that. Tyler would have handled it differently. When we'd watch movies, she'd comment on what Tyler thought about them. When we'd go to restaurants, she'd mention how Tyler never liked that type of food. It was like having a third person in our relationship. I addressed it a few times in the first year. Told her it was weird how often his name came up. She'd get defensive and say I was being insecure, that they were just friends now, and she couldn't help having memories. That I needed to trust her and stop being jealous of someone from her past. So I backed off because I didn't want to be that controlling boyfriend. But the Tyler references never stopped. If anything, they got more frequent as we got more serious. When we moved in together after 18 months, she wanted to keep a bunch of photos from college that had Tyler in them. Group shots from parties, pictures from spring break trips. Even some couple photos mixed in with family stuff. I said I wasn't comfortable having pictures of her ex-boyfriend all over our apartment. She said I was being ridiculous and they were just memories. We compromised. She could keep them, but they'd go in a box in the closet instead of being displayed. Except somehow they kept appearing around the apartment. On her nightstand, mixed in with work photos on her desk. Stuck to the refrigerator with other random pictures. Every time I'd point it out, she'd act like she forgot they were there. "Oh, I was just looking through old stuff and left that out." I didn't realize that was visible behind those other photos. It became this constant passive-aggressive thing where she'd push boundaries, then play innocent, when I noticed. The worst part was social media. She was still friends with Tyler on everything. Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, the works. She'd like his posts, comment on his photos, and he'd do the same for hers. Sometimes they'd have these long comment threads that looked more like private conversations happening in public. I asked her about it and got the same response. They were just friends. I was being paranoid. She couldn't help it if he happened to be active on social media. But then I started paying attention to what she was liking and commenting on. Tyler at the gym, Tyler with his new car. Tyler on vacation, Tyler with his friends. She was more engaged with his social media presence than she was with most of her actual friends. The really weird part was how she talked about his dating life. She always knew who he was seeing, how long they'd been together, why they'd broken up. She had more details about his relationships than I had about my own friends' dating situations. When I asked how she knew so much, she'd say they still talked occasionally. Just catching up as friends. But the level of detail suggested they were talking more than occasionally. I later found out from mutual friends that Rachel had stayed in touch with Tyler's sister and several of his college buddies who would fill her in on his life. About 6 months before we got engaged, Tyler got into a serious relationship with some woman named Jen. Rachel was weird about it. Moody and distracted. She'd check his social media obsessively, then get irritated when his posts were about Jen. That's when she started pushing hard for us to get engaged. We'd talked about marriage before, but suddenly it became urgent. When were we going to take the next step? What were we waiting for? All her friends were getting engaged. She wanted to start planning a future together. The timing felt off to me, like she was trying to prove something or compete with someone, but she was convincing about wanting to commit to our relationship. Said she'd been thinking about what really mattered and realized she wanted to build something permanent with me. So I proposed. Got her a nice ring. Nothing crazy expensive, but decent quality. She seemed happy and started planning immediately. Venue, dress, flowers, the whole production. But even during wedding planning, Tyler kept coming up. She'd mentioned how he'd always said he wanted a beach wedding, or how Tyler thought big weddings were wasteful, or how Tyler's sister had the most beautiful ceremony last year. I started wondering if she was marrying me or marrying the idea of marriage to make Tyler jealous. But every time I tried to bring it up, she'd turn it around on me. Why was I so obsessed with her ex? Why couldn't I just focus on our relationship instead of looking for problems? The worst incident happened about 3 months before our wedding. We were out with friends and Tyler showed up at the same bar. Just a coincidence, supposedly. But Rachel's whole demeanor changed. She got flirty and animated in a way I rarely saw with me. They talked for maybe 20 minutes while I stood there feeling like a third wheel. She was laughing at everything he said, touching his arm when she talked, acting like they were the only two people in the room. When we got home, I told her I wasn't comfortable with how she'd acted. She said I was overreacting and reading too much into normal friendly behavior, that I needed to get over my insecurity about Tyler because it was affecting our relationship. But I wasn't imagining things. She'd lit up around him in a way that made it clear she still had feelings. Strong feelings. 2 weeks before our wedding, Tyler and Jen broke up. Rachel found out somehow and was in this weird, good mood for days. She denied it had anything to do with Tyler, but the timing was obvious. That's when she started getting cold feet about our wedding. Suddenly, she was stressed about money, worried we were rushing into things, questioning whether we were really compatible long term. I asked if she wanted to postpone, and she said no. She wanted to go through with it, but her heart clearly wasn't in it anymore. She was going through the motions while mentally being somewhere else. Then came her sister's wedding, the weekend before ours was supposed to happen. Madison was getting married to her boyfriend of 3 years in this big church ceremony, followed by a reception at some fancy country club. Rachel was maid of honor, so she'd been involved in planning for months. I should mention that Madison and Rachel have always been competitive. Madison is 2 years older and has always been the golden child. Better grades, better job, better boyfriend according to their parents. Rachel has spent most of her life trying to keep up or prove she was just as successful. So when Madison got engaged, 6 months after we did, but planned her wedding for before ours, Rachel was annoyed. Said Madison was trying to steal her thunder. That it was typical Madison behavior to make everything about herself. The morning of Madison's wedding, Rachel was stressed and drinking early. Mimosas during hair and makeup. Wine while getting dressed. More wine during photos. By the time we got to the church, she was already tipsy. During the ceremony, she was emotional in a weird way. Not happy tears for her sister. More like sad, nostalgic crying that didn't match the moment. She kept checking her phone even though phones were supposed to be off. At the reception, she kept drinking. Champagne during cocktails, wine with dinner. More champagne during toasts. I tried to slow her down, but she brushed me off. Said it was her sister's wedding and she wanted to celebrate. The reception was at this country club with a big ballroom and an outdoor terrace, maybe 200 people total. Both families plus friends from high school and college. A lot of people I'd met but didn't know well. Everything was going fine until the dancing started. That's when Rachel really started getting sloppy. She was loud and stumbling and getting emotional about random things. I suggested we call an Uber and head home, but she wanted to stay. About an hour into the dancing, the DJ called for the traditional bouquet toss. All the single women gathered on the dance floor, while Madison stood on the little stage with her bouquet. Rachel wasn't single, obviously, but she pushed her way into the group anyway. She didn't catch the bouquet, but she was right in the thick of things. When it was over, the DJ started making announcements about upcoming weddings. He'd obviously been given a list because he mentioned Rachel and me along with 2 other couples. That's when things went sideways. The DJ handed the microphone to Madison to say something about her new marriage and thank everyone for coming. Madison gave a sweet speech about love and commitment and finding your person. Then she passed the microphone to their dad for the traditional father toast. But somehow Rachel intercepted it. She literally grabbed the microphone out of Madison's hand and stepped up to the center of the dance floor. 200 people turned to look at her. I knew immediately this was going to be bad. She was drunk and emotional and had that look she got when she was about to say something she'd regret later. I started moving toward her, but I was on the other side of the room. Then Rachel really lost it. I think the combination of alcohol, seeing her sister get married first, and knowing Tyler was single again, just broke whatever filter she had left. She started talking about her own engagement. How she'd been trying to convince herself she was making the right choice. How she'd been comparing every man she dated to someone from her past. How she knew deep down she was still in love with someone else, but he wouldn't commit. The room was getting quiet. People were realizing this wasn't a normal wedding toast. I was pushing through the crowd trying to get to her, but she was in her own world now. Like all the feelings she'd been bottling up for 4 years were pouring out at once. That's when she said the words that ended our relationship. I mean, honestly, I'm only marrying him because my ex won't commit. Tyler is the love of my life, but he doesn't want to get married, so I settled for someone who does. The silence was deafening. 200 people staring at her. Staring at me. You could hear a pin drop in that ballroom. Madison looked mortified. Their parents looked shocked. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, but I wasn't going to stand there and be humiliated in front of everyone we knew. I walked up to the front, took the microphone from Rachel, and looked out at all those faces staring at me. "Well," I said, "let me fix that for you." I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app where I kept our wedding vendor information. In a clear voice that carried through the sound system, I started reading. "Our wedding, scheduled for 2 weeks from today, is officially canceled. Pine Valley Country Club, your services will not be needed. Morrison Catering, your services will not be needed. Classic Sounds DJ service will not be needed." I went through the entire list of vendors we'd booked. Florist, photographer, musicians, transportation, even the officiant. Each announcement was met with gasps and murmurs from the crowd. Rachel was standing there looking horrified. She'd sobered up real quick when she realized what was happening. She kept trying to grab the microphone back, but I moved away from her. After I finished reading the vendor list, I looked back out at the crowd. Just to clarify for everyone here tonight, our wedding is officially canceled. Rachel is free to pursue her true love, Tyler, without being burdened by settling for someone like me. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the evening, celebrating Madison and James. I handed the microphone back to Madison, gave her a quick hug, and walked out of the reception. The ride home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. My phone was blowing up with calls and texts, but I ignored all of them. I just wanted to get home and process what had just happened. When I got to our apartment, I packed a bag and went to my buddy Mike's place. I wasn't ready to deal with Rachel when she got home. I needed space to think about what came next. She started calling around midnight, then texting, then calling again. I let it all go to voicemail. Whatever she had to say could wait until I was ready to hear it. The next morning, I had 37 missed calls and about 50 text messages. From Rachel, from Madison, from their parents, from mutual friends who'd been at the wedding. Everyone wanted to know what was happening and whether the wedding was really canceled. I listened to Rachel's voicemails first. The progression was interesting. Started with drunk rambling about how she didn't mean what she said, how it was just the alcohol talking, how she loved me and wanted to marry me. By morning, the messages were more panicked, begging me to call her back, promising she could explain everything, saying she'd made a terrible mistake and we could fix this. The final message was her crying and apologizing and pleading with me to come home so we could talk. I texted her back around noon. Said I'd be by later to get my stuff and we could talk then if she wanted. But I wasn't interested in explanations or apologies. She'd made her feelings clear in front of 200 people. When I got to the apartment, she was waiting with this whole speech prepared. She'd been drinking and made a mistake. She didn't really mean what she said. She was just emotional about her sister's wedding and stressed about our own wedding planning. But then she tried to minimize what had actually happened. Said it wasn't that bad, that people would forget about it, that we could still have our wedding and this would all blow over. That's when I knew for sure I was making the right decision. I told her I didn't care if she was drunk. Alcohol doesn't make you say things that aren't true. It just makes you say true things you normally wouldn't say. She'd been in love with Tyler our entire relationship. She'd been settling for me because I was willing to marry her, and he wasn't. She'd essentially admitted to 200 people that our whole engagement was a lie. She tried to argue that she chose me over Tyler. That actions mattered more than feelings. That she was committed to our relationship, even if she had lingering feelings for someone else. But I wasn't interested in being someone's second choice. I wasn't going to marry someone who was still in love with their ex, and I definitely wasn't going to pretend that what happened at the wedding was no big deal. I packed my stuff while she followed me around the apartment crying and begging me to reconsider. She promised she'd cut contact with Tyler completely, delete him from social media, do whatever it took to prove she was committed to our relationship. But it was too late for promises. She'd had 4 years to get over Tyler and clearly hadn't. If anything, she'd gotten more attached to him over time. Our engagement had just been her way of trying to make him jealous or prove she could move on. I left the ring on the kitchen counter and told her I'd be back for the rest of my stuff later. She could keep the apartment since her name was on the lease too. I just wanted out. The aftermath has been exactly what you'd expect. Her family is furious with me for humiliating Rachel in public. They think I should have handled it privately instead of making a scene at Madison's wedding. Rachel's mom called me a week later trying to do damage control, said Rachel was devastated and had made a horrible mistake, that she really did love me and was just confused, that I should give her another chance to prove herself. I told her I appreciated the call, but the decision was final. Rachel had shown me who she really was, and I believed her. Madison actually reached out to apologize for what happened at her wedding. She said she felt terrible that her reception had turned into drama for Rachel and me. I told her it wasn't her fault, and I was sorry Rachel had hijacked her special day. Most of our mutual friends have been supportive. They all saw what happened and understood why I reacted the way I did. A few think I could have handled it more privately, but none of them think I should take Rachel back. The Tyler situation is interesting. Apparently Rachel reached out to him after our breakup, thinking maybe now they could finally be together. But he wasn't interested. Told her he valued their friendship, but didn't want to date her again. So now she's single and realizes she burned everything down for someone who didn't want her anyway. I'd feel bad for her if she hadn't spent 4 years emotionally cheating on me with her ex. I heard through friends that she's been trying to date but having a hard time. Word gets around in our social circle, and apparently guys aren't interested in someone who's obviously not over her ex. She's also had to deal with the social embarrassment of everyone knowing what happened. It was a big wedding with people from high school and college. The story spread pretty quickly through our extended friend group. I've been doing fine. Better than fine, actually. I moved into a downtown loft and I'm enjoying being single again. Dating when I feel like it, but not rushing into anything serious. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I ignored. The constant Tyler references, the photos she insisted on keeping, the social media stalking, the way she lit up around him but was lukewarm with me. I convinced myself it was normal to have feelings about an ex, that it would fade over time as our relationship got stronger. But if anything, it got worse. She became more obsessed with him, not less. The engagement was probably her last attempt to get his attention, make him realize what he was losing. When that didn't work, she decided to go through with marrying me anyway, because it was better than being alone. But I'm not a consolation prize. I'm not going to marry someone who's settling for me because their first choice isn't available. And I'm definitely not going to pretend that level of disrespect is acceptable because she was drunk. The wedding cancellation was the right call. Humiliating, yes, but necessary. She humiliated me first by announcing to 200 people that she was only marrying me as a backup plan. I just made sure there were consequences for that level of disrespect. Some people think I went too far by canceling everything so publicly, that I should have waited and handled it privately later. But I wasn't going to slink away and let her spin the narrative. She created the public humiliation, so I responded publicly. Plus, all those vendors needed to know as soon as possible. Wedding vendors book months in advance. The sooner I canceled, the better chance they had of rebooking those dates with other clients. Rachel tried to contact me a few more times over the next month, wanting to talk about getting back together, wanting closure, wanting to explain herself better. I responded once to tell her I wasn't interested in any further communication and to please stop contacting me. She finally got the message and left me alone. Since we'd been splitting the rent on our shared apartment, I gave her 60 days notice that I was moving out so she could find a roommate or a cheaper place. Turns out she couldn't afford it on her salary alone and ended up moving back in with her parents before finding something smaller. The whole thing was a blessing in disguise, really. Better to find out who she really was before we got married and had kids and joint finances. Divorce would have been a lot messier than a broken engagement. I learned a lot about myself through this process. I learned I won't accept being someone's backup plan. I won't ignore red flags to avoid conflict, and I won't let someone disrespect me publicly without consequences. I also learned that sometimes the most dramatic response is the most honest response. I could have pulled Rachel aside quietly and talked to her privately, but that would have let her minimize what happened. Make excuses. Convince herself it wasn't that bad. By responding immediately and publicly, I made sure everyone understood exactly what had happened and why the engagement was over. No room for alternative narratives or damage control. Tyler contacted me about a month after everything went down. He wanted to apologize for the role he played in our relationship problems. Said he hadn't realized how Rachel felt about him and never encouraged her feelings. I told him I didn't blame him for Rachel's choices. He hadn't done anything wrong by being friendly with an ex-girlfriend. The problem was Rachel's inability to move on and my inability to see it clearly. He mentioned that Rachel had reached out to him after our breakup, but he'd made it clear he wasn't interested in anything romantic. Said he hoped she could find someone who appreciated her the way she deserved. I thought that was decent of him to reach out. Probably awkward for him too, since he was essentially the reason our relationship imploded. The funniest part of this whole mess is how it affected Madison's wedding. Apparently, people still talk about it at family gatherings. Not in a mean way, but like it's this legendary family drama that happened at Madison's reception. Madison says she doesn't mind because it makes for a good story. Plus, she got to be the mature sister who handled everything with grace while Rachel had a public meltdown. I'm dating someone new now. Sarah is a real estate attorney I met through work connections. She's smart and funny and refreshingly straightforward about what she wants. No games or hidden agendas or unresolved feelings about exes. When I told her about the Rachel situation, she said she was impressed I had the backbone to stand up for myself so decisively. Said too many people accept disrespect because they're afraid of being alone. That's probably true. I think part of me knew Rachel wasn't fully committed to our relationship, but I ignored it because breaking up seemed harder than working through it. The wedding announcement forced me to confront what I'd been avoiding. Rachel did me a favor, really. She showed everyone, including herself, who she really was and what she really wanted. She just didn't expect me to have enough self-respect to walk away from someone who was settling for me. The timing was brutal financially. 2 weeks before our wedding meant we lost most of our deposits and payments. Venues, caterers, photographers don't give refunds that close to the date. We were out probably $15,000 between the two of us. But honestly, It was worth every penny to end things cleanly, rather than go through with a marriage I knew was doomed. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if she hadn't gotten drunk and made that announcement. Would I have gone through with the wedding, knowing what I knew? Would I have spent years married to someone who was in love with someone else? Probably not. The red flags were too obvious to ignore forever. But it might have taken longer for me to build up the courage to leave. The public humiliation gave me the clarity and motivation I needed to end things decisively. Looking back, the whole relationship feels like a waste of 4 years. But I learned important lessons about self-respect and boundary setting that will serve me well going forward. I know now not to ignore obvious red flags because I want a relationship to work. I know not to accept being someone's backup plan. And I know that sometimes the most dramatic response is also the most appropriate response. Rachel got exactly what she deserved. She spent 4 years emotionally cheating on me with her ex, then publicly announced she was settling for me. The natural consequence of that level of disrespect was losing the relationship she was taking for granted. She could have had a good life with me if she'd actually committed to our relationship instead of using it as a way to make Tyler jealous. But she made her choice, and now